Today, our group will be discussing the concept of conflict resolution in the work field. We felt this was an important topic to discuss for three main reasons. First and foremost, conflict is a natural and an inevitable part of our lives that can appear in all aspects of our life. While today we'll be focusing on conflict resolution in the work field, conflict is still something that often arises between our friends, our family, professors, and many other people in our life. Therefore, learning proper resolution skills is something that can be carried over into all aspects of our life. Second, we felt many positives can come out of properly resolving conflicts, such as accomplishing goals and even strengthening relationships. The last reason, and the most obvious reason, is that any conflict that goes unresolved can become very, very messy. Therefore, we felt it is important to learn the proper ways to resolve conflict in order to avoid a big catastrophe.
Our first theory in conflict management is traditional theory. Traditional theory considers people involved in conflict situations as troublemakers. This view was dominant from the late 19th century until the mid-1940s. As conflict increases, the level of performance supposedly decreases. Conflict is viewed as something negative, violent, or destructive. Therefore, in traditional theory, conflict must always be avoided. The approach is to reduce, suppress, or eliminate conflict. Traditional theory is not usually effective, because when conflict is suppressed, the root of a problem is not correctly identified and the positive aspects that come along with conflict cannot arise. Suppressing conflict can lead to huge blowouts.
The next theory is the behavioral or human relations theory. This theory explains that conflict is natural and inevitable. This conflict may have a negative or positive impact based on the methods used to resolve it. It may increase performance, but can also cause a decrease in performance if it is not resolved properly or at all. The approach to resolve conflict is by accepting it, rationalizing it, and then working on it to adequately manage it. This differs from traditional theory, which says to avoid and suppress conflict. Positives of this theory is that allowing conflict to exist can lead to competition, which causes employees to work harder, thus increasing production. Another positive is that people can develop management skills and learn to coexist. A con of this theory are that some claim it is unhealthy to allow any amount of conflict to exist at all.
For empirical evidence to investigate our theory of interest, we looked at a study from the Journal of Applied Psychology called The Critical Role of Conflict Resolution in Teams, a close look at the links between conflict type, conflict management strategies, and team outcomes. In this study, they are particularly interested in how different approaches to managing various types of conflict are associated with increases or decreases in team performance, and they wanted to know if the way a team experiences, manages, and responds to its conflicts is critical to predict team success and future performance over time. They studied 65 new teams with 3 to 4 diverse members who had no history of working together. Their workload was sufficient, so it required interdependence between members, and their performance outcomes were important to them. So, all of the teams in this study started from the same point as they were newly formed, with the same resources, had the same task assignments and criteria, and were working under the same time constraints. Yet, as the study showed, even under these very similar conditions, they developed and applied conflict resolution strategies in very different ways with different results. And in order to complete the study, the method they used involved surveys with both open-ended and closed-ended responses given at 2 different time points. So the main findings that they found were linkages between different strategies of managing conflict and group performance and satisfaction. And they found that the top-performing teams overall showed 3 conflict resolution strategies. 1, they focused on content of the interpersonal interactions over delivery style. 2, they explicitly discussed reasoning behind any decisions made. And 3, they assigned work based off of relevant skills instead of volunteering or convenience. Overall, the study suggests that successful teams over time are proactive in anticipating the need for conflict resolution and develop strategies that apply to all group members. So this relates back to the behavioral and human relations theory of conflict resolution that our group is particularly interested in, because they understand that conflict is inevitable and natural, so they work to accept, rationalize, and properly manage conflict instead of avoiding it. And the study also found that their results were consistent with existing conclusions about the benefits of integrative and collaborative approaches to managing conflict and the drawbacks of avoiding approaches, which also relates back to this behavioral and human relations theory. Lastly, our group also thought it was relevant to note that the study suggests that conflict resolution strategies in groups should receive greater attention in predicting team performance than it currently receives due to its impact and performance on groups.
For our first case study, we interviewed Rebecca Zisselt, the Media Relations Manager at JDC. JDC is a nonprofit organization which helps elderly Jews in Eastern Europe. We asked her how her company usually handles conflict and to give an example with it. She explained that her company has weekly meetings where everyone is encouraged to speak up about any issues they're having so they can work it out. She gave an example of when she first began working at the company and felt her boss was not assigning her enough work and was afraid it was because her boss thought she was not competent enough to get it done. While she was nervous to bring it up in the meeting, her boss opened the meeting up, as Becca explained to me he always did, reminding everyone to be respectful and to feel comfortable bringing up any issues they have since it's for the better of the company. Sure enough, she spoke up, and they peacefully resolved the conflict. And since then, Rebecca has been very content with the work assigned to her and has overall been very happy working at the organization. She also expressed to me that if she never spoke up about this, then she most likely would have continued to harp on the issue, which would have made her very unhappy working at the company. This is a great example of the behavioral theory because it shows how acknowledging a conflict is the key to resolving, opposed to avoiding the conflict, which, as Rebecca expressed, would have made the situation significantly worse.
One of the case studies that we evaluated was at Bradford MDC. This is the Metropolitan District Council for the city of Bradford in England. They ran an experiment to evaluate the growing concern of workplace conflict and individual employee disputes. The three methods that they used to evaluate conflict was an in-house mediation scheme, establishing an industrial relations framework between management and unions, and finally introducing a network of resolution officers to the company. Their methodology in this case study, experimenters first evaluated the policies that were already in place. Some of these included a grievance procedure, which was looked at as a very lengthy process, which often caused workers to lose sight of the true problem at hand. There was a formal complaint procedure, which was also a lengthy process that ended up taking too much time and costing too much money. And then finally, there was an informal procedure, which was a route taken with no paperwork or formal intent that was taken care of with just the people involved. The main point from investigating the policies that were implemented prior to this case study was to show that there was no clear singular process for people to follow to solve disputes and conflicts, as there were many different approaches that workers took. Results in conclusion, it was realized that the rigorous and formal procedures, such as the grievance procedure and the formal complaint procedure, they ended up causing people to handle conflict in an informal manner. And the implementation of these three methods of conflict resolution showed support for the human relations theory, one of the theories that we spoke about earlier in this presentation. This theory touches on how, in order to handle conflict, people must accept it, rationalize it, and then find the correct method to handle it. One of the implemented strategies to solving conflict that was in this case study that specifically shows support for the human relations theory was in-house mediation. This showed positive results for solving conflict at Bradford MDC, and it aligns with the human relations theory because it shows that managers after the experiment became more open-minded by accepting conflict and opposing views in an issue in order to find the best possible strategy to handle the problem.
In conclusion, implement the behavioral theory in your work field when resolving conflict. Again, the behavioral theory explains that conflict must be resolved by accepting it, rationalizing it, and managing it. As we saw through the evidence and case studies, managing it can be done through a multitude of ways, such as weekly meetings assigned for discussing conflict or in-house mediation. Finding which method of managing conflict works best for your team can be done through surveying employees or just simply consistently evaluating your current method and improving it. Overall, the traditional theory of avoiding conflict will lead to major problems in the company, and therefore, conflict must be addressed and properly dealt with, as explained by the behavioral theory.